Carbon offsets are quickly becoming the new frontier of the climate wars. If you've ever booked a plane ticket, you might have seen that box to tick that promises to offset your share of emissions for the flight. But now claims of being carbon neutral and offsetting are springing up everywhere. There's carbon neutral beer, carbon neutral phone companies, carbon neutral advertising space. Heck, I could own a private jet, 8 cars and eat 7 steaks a day, and theoretically I could call myself carbon neutral if I wanted to. But perhaps most egregiously, now we've got carbon neutral petrol and carbon neutral gas. If it sounds too good to be true, yeah, it probably is. Red flag number 1. Businesses will often carefully select a specific part of their activities that they want to make carbon neutral. So for example, there are gas companies that call themselves carbon neutral gas producers because they've offset the emissions from their business operations, like their offices or their stationery, conveniently ignoring the massive amount of emissions from producing and combusting their gas. Red flag number 2 is that often the carbon credits that these companies are buying are completely dodgy. Research in Australia has found that up to 75% of carbon credits used here may be hot air. Carbon credits are generated from projects that reduce or avoid or store CO2. So that could be tree planting or not cutting down trees or capturing gases from landfill. And for every tonne of CO2 they stop entering the atmosphere, they're given a carbon credit. So then a polluter can buy that carbon credit and basically say, well, someone else reduced their emissions, it's okay for me to put this tonne of CO2 into the atmosphere. But are these claims legit? Well, because of the rampant combination of creative accounting and dodgy offsets, likely not. Some of the businesses making these claims, in fairness, are trying to do so in good faith, but others, on the other hand, are blatantly trying to mislead consumers and shareholders. So let's dive into the murky world of carbon neutral fossil fuels, where carbon offsets are being used not to reduce or neutralise emissions, but as a Trojan horse to justify making emissions worse. So remember that carbon neutral petrol?
At Ampol, we're serious about transitioning to a low carbon future. We know this matters to our customers, and it matters to us, but we have a long journey ahead of us all. Offering a carbon neutral product is one of the first steps we're taking on this transition.
Yeah, that's not a hypothetical. Ampol is currently selling what they call carbon neutral petrol and diesel. In the Netherlands, the Dutch advertising watchdog declared that a claim like that was misleading. But in Australia, this carbon neutral petrol is actually certified by the Australian government. There was a complaint made to the Australian advertising watchdog, but they said, nah, no worries, Ampol's claims are not misleading. Fossil fuel companies promoting themselves as climate leaders is what we've come to expect from industry. But that's not really the main issue here. The problem in Australia is that the government itself is either turning a blind eye to greenwashing or it's actively giving it a big tick of approval. In Australia, carbon neutral fossil fuels, tick. Carbon neutral gas companies, tick. The government's not just certifying these claims, it's also giving approval to the dodgy offsets being used too. So to put all this in perspective, Ampol has reported offsetting about 80,000 tonnes of emissions. 44% of that is with Australian carbon credits that are so questionable that they're currently subject to a government review. The rest are international credits, and honestly, we couldn't tell you what's going on with them. Ampol's emissions from its products, according to its own sustainability report, is 41 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent. The emissions from the whole company are about 54 million tonnes a year. Ampol can't even say how it's going to get to net zero. So is this what a progressive climate leader looks like? Yeah, according to the Australian government, it is. The Australian government has spent years greenwashing its own policies. In terms of real action though, we've actually made minimal progress in reducing emissions from fossil fuels, and our trends are some of the worst in the developed world. But these impossible carbon neutral claims are actually really convenient from the government. It means that they can delay or avoid the political difficulties that real decarbonisation would bring. They can just point to the fact that Woodside has a climate target and say, we'll all get to net zero, it's okay. But it's not okay, And we need your help to share this video so that others can see what's really going on here too. Yeah, industry is greenwashing, but so is the government.